Thank you. This is such an incredible privilege to have a chance to be before you today. Being back at Chestnut Hill, it's so hard to believe that it was 40 years ago, this June, that I graduated from this school. And to be able to talk about the second half of life, and I hope many of you happen to be part of our membership of the second half of life, it's an incredible opportunity to talk about the things that we do, we care about, and its relationship to the concept of our spirituality. You know, this afternoon and this morning you'll have a chance to hear sessions that perhaps speak a little bit more to some of our background in our Jesuit community here. But there's a concept of spirituality that also goes beyond specific religion in and of itself. But this is a journey, and that's part of the title. When I finished here in nursing school, I, like so many of you, probably had no idea the kind of travels, journeys, and experiences that we have all gone through. Some of them have been fantastically welcomed, and some of them, of course, for all of us, have been extremely difficult. I never certainly envisioned being a young widow, nor did I think that I would care for not only both my parents, but my brother. And then, on the other hand, the joy of opportunity of receiving an incredible recognition from my alma mater with the honorary doctorate. Neither did I expect to wind up as president of AARP, a nearly 38 million member organization devoted to the needs, the concerns, and the interests of people who are 50 and older. I certainly also never guessed that a few weeks from now, that with my term ending as the AARP board member and president of the association, I would be poised to take another leap into another great life transition. Tomorrow, I'll have a chance to join my husband at our new apartment in New York City, where I will launch the next leg of my life's journey as CEO of the American Geriatric Society. This is an organization that is really dedicated to the health and the well-being of older adults, and especially those people who live with complex issues. When Jim had a chance to show you some of the data of who is growing rapidly, it's really the older population, the 75 plus, but especially the 85 plus population. And this has actually been part of my life's work for that 25-year body of activity that I had in San Francisco. So I think I can understand this whole concept of the aspect of encore careers. One of the things I wanted to share with you that this organization called Civic Ventures offers, and some of you may have seen over the past few years, what's called a Purpose Prize. And these are people who are over 60 years old, who have had an opportunity to do a body of work, but choose to take on a very difficult social issue and have a chance to make and contribute a difference, be it with the skills that they've had before, but crafting it for something that is a knotty social issue. These individuals who end up winning this so-called prize of this significance is basically like a mini MacArthur Prize that we hear about in a younger age for people, and that is they get $100,000, and not for them personally, but for the not-for-profit organizations that they are connected with in order to advance that particular work. So some of the examples of what they have had a chance to do with these individuals who've won the prize, from everything from bringing mental health treatment to trauma victims all over the globe, to making green the kind of burning bricks that support coal, that actually basically mitigate using coal burning products, and that way help the environment. And then also another example that really touches my heart is the ability of somebody to recognize that when we talk about caregiving, as Jim mentioned, some of the work that is important in our later life, there are many children who are young children who are middle school and high school students who end up being caregivers for their family members. So as a person who's in the midst of launching another encore career, my mind has been very much focused on how do you navigate life's transitions. We move through each day, putting one foot in front of the other, never knowing which step will turn out to be the first of another life-altering path. Then before we know it, we find ourselves, as I do today, looking back over decades and wonder at the bends of life and the roads that we've taken. Transitions come with our territory, as long as you're alive. It's best to certainly embrace them. Researchers have concluded that major transitions have several elements in common and that we tend to move through them in predictable stages. But the transitions that take place in midlife and beyond appear to be adding up to something new, something unique, and something bigger, where there's never been as large of a cohort as there has been coming up at this time. So as mentioned earlier, this is a very large baby boomer population that is moving through the demographic stages. And what has happened then, our personal stages wind up as social phenomena with ramifications that transform far more than the individuals who are going through these changes. Excuse me. Go back here. Whoops. I wonder if I can go back. Thank you. Didn't want you to miss this slide. This whole aspect of going through changes is what I'd like to have a chance to share with you today. The transition into older age as a new life stage, something is quite different than we've seen before, with the examples of people that we recognize, at least 3 out of the 4 some of us may have seen. But it just speaks to some work that's been done by the Harvard educational sociologist Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. And she's called it the third chapter, that takes place loosely between the ages of 50 to 75. She describes this phase as a kind of anthropological expedition that entails, quotes, changing, adapting, exploring, mastery, and channeling energies, skills, and passions into new domains. According to Lightfoot, the third chapter represents a significant and new developmental period in our culture, one that only comes around once a century. She identifies certain qualities that allow us to wring out the most meaning from the experience. These are the ability to relinquish fear of the unknown and fear of failure, being able to name the fear and take a leap of faith, a willingness to be vulnerable and expose oneself to public floundering, an ability to embrace contradictions and integrate the new with the familiar. As I read it, and as I'm experiencing it, the third chapter of life has a strong spiritual component. The Reverend Donald Kepke, director of the Center for Spirituality and Aging in Anaheim, California, has described it this way. The majority of people in the world belong to a traditional religion. Spirituality is much larger. As people age, confronting their mortality is a part of it. But as things change, they begin to recognize who they are and who they aren't, and the strengths that they have and the strengths they don't have. They begin to think about the value and meaning of life. Tending to think more interior than exterior often happens when we're about 45 to 50. But then there's a screaming need for it when we reach 85 or 95. Part of the spiritual journey that comes with aging is the overwhelming desire to leave a legacy, to make certain that we've marked our passage through the world by bequeathing a better place for our children and grandchildren. We begin to feel more deeply than ever that our moral and social responsibilities are closely intertwined. I can't listen to a description of this phase of life without thinking about one woman in particular, Ethel Andrus, who was the founder of AARP. It might be true that we baby boomers are the moving force behind a once-in-a-century developmental period, but at least one woman in the 1950s beat us to it. She acted as if the third chapter were already a done deal, and she made sure she brought many others along for the ride. She did it several decades ahead of schedule before this phenomenon was described. So let me tell you a little bit about Ethel. She's probably one of the most important people in the world, and chances are you've never heard of her. Ethel was born in San Francisco in 1884, the year the Statue of Liberty was begun. During her early career, after earning a PhD, which was rather remarkable already at that time, she became the first woman high school principal in the state of California. Lincoln High School was a multicultural school with one of the highest delinquency rates in the country. Students there spoke 32 different languages at home, and this is back in the 30s. Dr. Andrus turned the school around, building character, respect, mutual appreciation among her students, and involving them in community service. When Ethel Percy Andrus retired to care for her frail mother, she became deeply disturbed by the plight of many older people, including retired teachers. So she volunteered with the California Retired Teachers Association. Her experience on one rainy day in 1947 marked a turning point in her life's work. Ethel heard through a local grocer that an elderly woman who had struggled to pay for her groceries needed help. So Ethel drove to the address, but nobody was home. A neighbor then remembered, quotes, "There's an old lady who lives out back." Out back was this chicken coop. Its occupant turned out to be a distinguished Spanish teacher who fell on bad times after the Great Depression. She couldn't afford food, medicine, or, obviously, decent housing. That did it. To give retired teachers a national voice, Ethel established the National Retired Teachers Association. One of her first priorities was to break through insurance companies' historic stereotypes of aging. She went to company after company trying to convince them that they could run a business, make a profit, and insure older Americans. She was rejected, amazingly enough, 42 times. Talk about stubborn. Recalling these 42 visits, Dr. Andrus said, "They thought I was a crank. They all said they would go broke if they wrote the policy that I wanted." She finally persuaded company number 43 to launch a pilot program for New York's retired teachers. It was a success for all who were involved. Soon, the organization was flooded with cards and letters from older people who were not teachers, who wanted to know how they too could get health insurance. This is before the days of Medicare, incidentally, when you think about the reference time. Ethel expanded her work, and in 1958, at the age and tender age of 73, she founded AARP. Now it has close to 38 million members. Ethel Percy Andrus lived her life by the motto, "To serve, not to be served," which remains AARP's motto today. She founded AARP on the principles of collective purpose, collective voice, and collective purchasing power. That's why you like those discounts. Ethel was a remarkable woman, but the truth is you don't have to be remarkable to make a difference in the world. Each one of us can do something. Each of us has something to contribute. Each of us can ease the way for someone else. In this life, Mother Teresa said, "We cannot do great things. We can only do small things with great love." You don't have to be a hero. Still, I'd like to add a cautionary note. Think back to the qualities that Sarah Lightfoot outlined that helped to make the third chapter a success. In particular, think about these two. One, a willingness to be vulnerable and expose oneself to public floundering, an ability to embrace contradictions and to integrate the new with the familiar. When I was a younger woman, it's fair to say that I had a few things to learn about these two qualities, and let me give you an example of my own humbling tale. The story takes place in Moscow, Idaho, a far place away from Chestnut Hill. When I came to this small town early in my career at the age of 24, I felt confident, felt good, I could do something that could be very helpful. And all I had to do was to bring it and teach it to the people in this farming and logging community. With a high teen pregnancy and child abuse rate, I felt that clearly health education and intervention were going to be necessary. After a fair bit of research, I lost no time in proposing to the local school board that they allocate funds to hire its first part-time school nurse for the modest amount of $1 a student. I knew just exactly where they could find that money because I found that there was tons of money in the football team. Surprise! Well, $1, that's going to be really easy. So I went before the school board, made my case, presented my data, not quite as elegant as Jim in his charts, but I did the case. They all politely listened to me. Men in the school board listening to me, somebody who obviously was green and obviously not familiar with the community. And I felt that psychological head pat. And they sent me on my way, telling me it was a nice idea. So public floundering, remember? I certainly knew it well. Clearly, I didn't have a clue about what was really important in this town. You think that I would have learned that from BC, but somehow I didn't carry that lesson. I didn't appreciate that football trumped healthcare. So this is something that was a very important personal cultural lesson for me. I grew up quickly. I made many, many home visits to families over the course of the couple of years in the course of my work and got to know the parents and understood how decisions were being made. Over time, I formed relationships and built up some trust. And ultimately, it was the parents who convinced the school board that a nurse was essential for their children's health and well-being. I learned the hard way, the necessity of integrating the new with the familiar and accepting contradictions from my value system, which is that even though football is very important, I thought children's health was pretty important. Ultimately, I watched this idea succeed, although the success belongs to the parents and certainly not me. In this slide with Homer Simpson, Woody Allen has said, if you're not failing every now and again, it's a sign you're not doing anything or not enough in the innovative space. I think we know this is such an important lesson to learn. And now with those 70 million baby boomers, including myself, reaching their third chapters, it's actually been said that another baby boomer, incidentally, turns 50 every 7 seconds. So just look at your watch and think about how many people are turning 50. So we're going to be soon welcoming a potential amazing boon of services, what Dr. Andrus envisioned as, her quotes, an army of useful citizens, end quote. They'll have much to learn too, but what a blessed bounty of good that they'll be willing and able to do. So here come the boomers. I must say, people have embraced the approach of this aging army with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Yep, it's often been stated in apocalyptic terms. I've heard it referred to the silver tsunami, a boomer horde, as you see. Hide your children, take cover. And unfortunately, there are no shortage of attempts to pit generational warfare that pits older people as greedy geezers against the poor millennials who will be forced to live in their parents' basements and work us to the grave here. So what the doomsayers have yet to discover is how off the mark that these depictions are. Boomers may have begun life as the me generation, but the older we get, the less time we spend thinking of ourselves. Remember what I said a few moments ago, that more than anything else, we do want to leave the world a better place for the next generation. And it's interesting to realize that the values of the boomers and the millennials are a lot more synergistic than antagonistic, paving a way for a potential new cross-generational collaboration. Whoops, here we go again. The third chapter is about leaving a legacy, a footprint, if you will. There's nothing in this third chapter about plans to lay waste to our countryside or plundering the national treasury. In fact, The boomers' desire to give back is as strong or even stronger than any other generation. We've known for a while that baby boomers would radically alter the demographic profile of our nation's volunteer pool, and we suspected that they would change the face of volunteering itself. It turns out to be exactly the case. In a recent AARP survey, 4 of every 10 boomers told us that they really want to do more to make a difference in their communities. And I really believe those numbers will rise sharply in the coming years, probably for that point of vigor that Osher mentioned. But they'll want to do it differently from their predecessors. They'll want to do it their own way. In a number of surveys about volunteering, boomers have expressed repeatedly a clear preference for flexible, customizable experiences. They often have time constraints because many of us are still working, and yet a keen interest in both creating and directing their own efforts. In other words, they want to volunteer, but on their own time and on their own terms. And the boomers prefer to do far more than busy work. They want to put their time and skills to a targeted purpose. They don't want to be tied down with commitment and structure often. Fortunately, with such a huge group to draw on, those passions, skills, and abilities are pretty much boundless, which means the opportunities for this Army will be useful are boundless as well. So there is a wave of human capital on its way to lend us its strength. How do we take best advantage of it? How do we help to encourage and nurture the boomers' desire to make life more meaningful by giving to others? How do we help foster this form of spiritual journey? AARP has been thinking about this. As an organization dedicated to service, we knew that if we wanted AARP to continue to be a significant and powerful force for social change in the United States, we must rethink our volunteer opportunities to be more flexible and adaptable to the boomers' needs. At the same time, we needed to remember that we serve 3 generations of members. Those of you who are at 49 and 9 months are part of our leading edge, but we have members of AARP that are in their hundreds. So we really actually have 3 generations of members in our community of members. To help guide us, as part of AARP's recent 50th anniversary celebration, the Association commissioned a report from 3 highly respected people in the field of civic engagement. Harris Wolford, who started the Peace Corps, Robert Putnam from Harvard nearby, who wrote that Sentinel Bowling Alone, and John Bridgeland, who has been a known activist in the whole field of civic engagement. That report is called More to Give: Tapping the Talents of the Baby Boomer, Silent, and Greatest Generations. The report is helping to light the way for AARP as we deepen and broaden both volunteer and civic engagement. It's based on a survey of Americans aged 45 to 79. We found that 4 out of 10 of them say that they're likely to increase the time that they spend volunteering in the next 5 years. That means a cadre of 45 million people. And to check the significance of that self-assessment by people who were surveyed, we asked current retirees whether they had started volunteering more when they retired. The answer we got back was really encouraging. 4 in 10 reported having volunteered more than once after they retired. The report painted a picture, backed up by data, that boomers and their older counterparts do indeed represent a tremendous resource, that they want to make a difference in people's lives, and they're already volunteering at high rates and want to do more. We actually broke it down a bit and found that boomers, Hispanics and Latinos, and African American blacks were the most likely to expect that their volunteer service will increase. We also found that for the majority of respondents, health and caregiving responsibilities were not always the causes preventing them from volunteering. Not surprisingly, the leading barrier to volunteering was time, along with the need to earn money, a pretty close second. And since the study was conducted just before these challenging economic times, I think we know that economic security issues have risen with much greater importance. Another big barrier, and this was really surprising, that no one had actually asked them to help. If asked, they said they would act. So the desire to reach out to others, to live outside of oneself, to make the world a better place, all these pieces are actually aligned. Boomers are ready to plunge into service, that all-important experience that shapes this third chapter. But how do we motivate this army of useful citizens? My own advice would be, if you're seeking volunteers, don't hesitate to ask. And if you're inclined to volunteer, don't wait to be asked. How wonderful it is, Anne Frank once said, that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Take the step. Remember that you don't have to be a hero with a capital H. Each one of us can do something about this. I've been a volunteer for my entire tenure at AARP, and that is 8 years, as well as all the other members of the board and millions of other members who choose to do this. But I still discover interesting tidbits about volunteering all the time. One of the things I find fascinating about engaging people in service opportunities is how we talk about it. While the principle of helping people in need has been around since we began to walk upright, the terminology has changed over the years. We're not quite sure what to call this stuff. Actions that range from managed, trained Peace Corps type efforts to random acts of kindness. There's a vast disagreement on what to call that action. When we say volunteer, contribute, serve, or civic engagement, these things mean different things to different people, and especially the people who do research on them. For example, volunteer can be interpreted as enlisting in the armed forces, kind of a familiar logo that we have seen growing up. Contribute can denote giving money. And to say you perform many hours of community service can make other people think, boy, you haven't done necessarily something good, but something really, really bad. As for civic engagement, one of my AARP's colleagues told me that if you asked her 96-year-old mother when was the last time she volunteered or did community service, she wouldn't necessarily know what you're talking about. But if you asked, when was the last time she helped somebody without getting paid, she'd know exactly what you meant. The language promises to unfold in interesting ways over the next few years. It may prove useful when determining and developing terminology for volunteering by thinking about the motivations behind volunteering. People tell us that their primary motivator is their desire to, quote, help people in need, make a difference, or to give back. These words seem to ring universal bells, and we should turn to them first. So what role does AARP play in this? We're stepping up our game in terms of these efforts. We understand that increasing volunteer engagement depends not only on inspiration, but also on infrastructure. We're working harder than ever to help the structure to make the volunteer experience more accessible. We need to make sure that people can find paths of engagement that work for them and that they can engage in these paths easily and use their skills well. And we need to make sure the nonprofit community has the capacity to handle the increased number of volunteers that we hope to engage. Through a greater use of technology and connecting people with one another, we'll be engaging more and more of our members to make a difference in their communities. We'll be enforcing long-standing, successful volunteer programs such as driver safety and AARP tax aid, where our volunteers annually help over 2 million people who are lower income to be able to fill out their taxes for free. We'll be creating new opportunities for engagement in such areas such as work search, which is intended to help mature people obtain jobs, and especially given the kind of economic insecurity that exists today for people who have lost their job in their 40s and older, this is going to be absolutely crucial. We're increasing our work in wellness and prevention programs, and in helping older Americans live safely and independently at home. As a membership and service organization, we're recognizing that we can offer potential volunteers a wide array of self-directed types of actions. And we also have recognized that nowadays we need to deliver an online experience that's easy to use and that ignites and channels passions around our issues. And I think you all probably have read in the news that the fastest growing demographic learning to go online and using online are people who are 50 and older. There has been a major shift from the way we traditionally have approached volunteerism. In October 2008, our efforts began coming to fruition when we announced our Office of Volunteer and Civic Engagement. We began actively recruiting many more AARP members for civic engagement by offering a new set of ways to make a difference based on an individual's available time, interest, community, and expertise. We are calling let's see here, I've got a trigger finger here. We are calling our rapidly growing community of volunteers the Create the Good Network. This name was inspired by a quote again from our own Ethel Andrus, who said, quotes, "The challenge to live up to our better selves, to believe well of our fellow men," and I would say women, and perhaps by doing so to help create the good, to experiment, to explore, to change, and to grow. So this is now on our website that's available to see our Create the Good. It has broadened our scope beyond traditional volunteering and is offering new ways to make a difference. Now, when prospective volunteers visit this site, they discover hundreds of opportunities to get involved in activities that help their neighbors and communities, whether they have 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days to contribute. And we're also offering the downloadable toolkits, which we are introducing every quarter. So every quarter we have a new set of optional activities that people can choose to do. With these toolkits, volunteers don't need somebody to necessarily train them or supervise them. They are able to basically have a turnkey system to do some of this themselves. This is perfectly suited to match the inclinations of boomer volunteers, of the budding army of useful citizens ready to launch into their third chapter. It was Albert Schweitzer that they, and I mean, of course, we, gain more experience as volunteers. They will most likely feel the urge to do more. And there is mounting evidence that volunteering can be a key to better health and happiness. Albert Schweitzer once said, quotes, "I don't know what your destiny will be, but one thing I know, the only ones among you who will be really happy are those who will have sought and found how to serve." And research does bear this out. A Journal of Gerontology study found that older adults who volunteer report higher levels of well-being. And this is significant, as the same positive effect was reported across lines of race, gender, and income level. And at Vanderbilt University, a study found that volunteer work enhances these 6 aspects of personal well-being. 1, happiness. 2, life satisfaction. 3, self-esteem. 4, a sense of control over life. 4, physical health, and not least is a relief from depression. Because as many of us who are in nursing and medicine and social work know, that depression is actually the strongest diagnosis that affects older people. Each of us can do something to make a difference in the life of another. Each of us has something to contribute. Betty Reese, the founder of Body Shops, the cosmetic store, likes to say, "If you think that you're too small to be effective, you've never been in a tent with a mosquito." AARP is, and I'm happy to say, not alone in recognizing the amazing potential of those living in and beyond their third chapters. I want to mention the Edward M. Kennedy Serve America Act, drafted by your own Senator, late Senator Ted Kennedy, and as well as Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, a wonderful bipartisan bill. And this was signed into law just this past April by President Obama. This new law is enhancing service opportunities specifically for those of us 50 plus, so that we can apply our skills to a range of service needs. It helps the capacities of nonprofit service and philanthropic organizations to recruit, manage, and apply volunteer skills to identified service needs in this period of economic recession and oftentimes areas of reduced charitable giving. The new law will ensure that service programs are better able to accommodate all volunteers and others who want to give back to their communities. It encompasses a broad array of service organizations, including social services, the environment, health, caregiving, nurturing, mentoring, intergenerational solutions, education, and economic and community development. In a nutshell, I believe the Serve America Act will help us usher in a new wave of enthusiasm about helping others across America. This seems like a good time to tell one more story. This is about the violinist Jascha Heifetz, who at the height of his career as an international performing artist left performing to become a professor at UCLA. His colleagues couldn't believe he was doing this. They said, "Why would you leave the glamour, the excitement, the financial rewards to become a teacher?" Heifetz responded, "Violin playing is a perishable art. It must be passed on, otherwise it will be lost." And this is something, incidentally, as a side comment, I had a chance to visit Vietnam and Cambodia a couple of years ago, and at a time a lot of the atrocities were going on soon after I graduated from here, and did not realize that. What happened in the course of the loss of about 40% of its adult population at that time, they decimated all the artists and artisans and philosophers and educators. And it's phenomenal to realize what that will do to a society if you don't treasure the art that you have and take an intentional approach to pass it on. So like him, each and every one of us has something to learn and something to teach. Each one of us possesses something valuable and perishable. It's then that we can understand the soul of the third chapter and the spirit of lifelong learning. In order to keep doing good, giving back, and helping others, and in order to continue to grow intellectually, spiritually, and professionally, people of all ages are going to have to do nothing less than to change their view of learning. This is a view, by the way, that has been held firmly since the time of Aristotle. That's right. From Aristotle's time, some 2,300 years ago, right up through the present, learning has been viewed essentially in blocks of time. The 8-year block, the 12-year block, or the 16-year experience. An experience of young people that takes place primarily in a classroom. A major obstacle to embracing this new view of learning is about our tendency to confuse the terms learning and schooling. Many people still believe that the only way it's possible to learn very much is through the process of formal education. In other words, to go to school, sit in a classroom, take tests, and listen to the teacher. Now, and let me emphasize, of course, our society has been built on a foundation of traditional learning in the classroom. But in this century, the structure of learning will have to and has expanded enormously beyond the traditional model to fit the evolving needs of the available new technology and to meet the expansive demands of a knowledge-hungry economy. The process of learning cannot be confined to the classroom, and it cannot end between the ages of 18 and 25. Learning must become an 80-year or 90-year or even 100-year experience. In other words, lifelong. We're definitely moving in this direction. One organization is the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, which has established a network of 122 lifelong institutes connected to academic institutions for older learners throughout the country. You have such a program in the Berkshire Community College in this Boston area. The universe of resources keeps growing. We must change the way we have traditionally viewed learning and education so that we can face the challenges of growth and knowledge that will be available to us. The internet is only the beginning, only a prelude to what is already becoming a networked world. So it will no longer be realistic for people of any age to think in terms of learning, working life, retirement as the successive phases of their lives in 3 boxes. Most of us can remember when a skill acquired in one's early years would provide a lifetime of reward. Today, knowledge acquired in early years of life becomes obsolete, sometimes before one has fully had the opportunity to put it to full use. In the years ahead, the way people shape and conduct their lives, as well as the way they manage their work and leisure time, must revolve around the concept of learning throughout our life cycle. AARP is adapting to meet the challenges of members who will be learning for a lifetime. We're recasting AARP's role from an all-knowing resource to the fact that boomers and aging will perhaps use us as a trusted advisor to their membership. In this role, we anticipate our members' needs and offer them an array of interactive tools and resources that can help meet their needs. We're actually become an aggregator of information sources, not so much as the final word on issues of concern to the 50-plus segment. We are becoming a place to consult for customized assistance. One way we're doing this is by integrating content. AARP is blessed with enormous depth in our communication properties. We have a highly visible print presence, some of which I think some of you know about, and we have a bilingual print, audio, and video set of resources. AARP wants to meet boomers wherever they are and possibly in whatever language that they speak. The digital age actually helps us clarify which channel of distribution is best. Sometimes online, rather than a structure, AARP.org is a comprehensive depot of information and a social networking site as well. We're working to make the web more inviting for the empowered decision maker and the quick answer seeker alike to shape a more meaningful online experience. I talked a little bit about Create the Good, and it serves as an example as a learning context as well. This is more than a website. It is a lifestyle and learning destination. It is a portal where you can find hundreds of opportunities that you can use to help your neighbors and strengthen our communities. It's a convenient one-stop cyber stop where you can connect with a network of like-minded citizens similarly determined to make a difference. The message sent by Create the Good is that the sky is the limit for learning and for making the world a better place. It is an open invitation for boomers and others to give back and take action wherever they are and wherever there is a need. We're extending the model to other learning areas as well. When the current economic crisis unfolded, it was our members who expressed concern about financial security, prompting us to look at issues like investor protections. In October 2009, we launched Tuna, a website that provides 25 to 35-year-olds, my son's in that category, with financial tools and advice as ways to address members' concerns about the well-being financially of their children and grandchildren. The case for Tuna, which incorporated research data from our members who said that 69% of our AARP members were still supporting adult children, or as our CEO likes to say, they're still on our payroll. Tuna was a direct response to this finding. So in our 51st year, our own third chapter, AARP is determined to keep growing and adapting to the changing needs of our members. I'll give you one last example to illustrate how this journey is playing out for us. It came on the heels of the devastating earthquake in Haiti. About 4:45 one Thursday afternoon, following a leadership decision to match $500,000 in our AARP staff and member donations to an emergency appeal for older victims of the earthquake, we dispatched a special edition of our daily staff e-newsletter that showed the decision that we had made as an organization and encouraged people to donate. 5 minutes later, an AARP staffer posted a message announcing the appeal on Yammer. Shortly after, 40,000 people within our AARP orbit knew about it. Later that evening, another AARP staffer posted a message about the appeal on her Facebook and on Twitter, asking her community to share the request and make a donation. By the next morning, the appeal had logged $170,000 in contributions. Within just a couple of days, the appeal had raised $877,000, plus then the $500,000 match AARP had provided, for a total of $1.4 million. In a mere fraction of the time it would have taken AARP to draft, finalize, disseminate an appeal letter, we had already reached our fundraising goals. Small things done with great love, leaving a footprint, making a difference, learning for life. These are the hallmarks of a new kind of aging, a spiritual experience with the eyes, mind, and heart focused outside of oneself. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here on discussing our journeys with you today. I'll leave you with two of my favorite quotations. One is Mark Twain's, and he said, "20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. So throw off the bowlines, sail away from the safe harbor, catch the trade winds in your sails, explore, dream, discover." And a final bit of advice from Will Rogers. I can tell this is visible. Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. Thank you so very much for being here today, and I know you'll find the expertise of our speakers good. Thank you.